Halloween Stalker by Super Unknown 315. I had a strange, unsolved experience as a kid that has been on my mind lately, and decided this is the best place to share. The first half of the story takes place on Halloween, 1991. Quick bit of background. I was a 7-year-old boy at the time, and my little sister was only a few months old. I lived in Long Island, New York, on the border area of the town that kind of acted as an unspoken separation between the more affluent area and the lower-income hood-type area. My dad owned a bar across from the train station that was extremely popular in the 80s and was still riding the tail end of that boom. My father did very well for himself, actually. My father and his business were well known around town. I think this may have had to do with what happened. He eventually squandered everything on a heroin addiction, but that's a different story. And for the record, I had nothing but love and respect for him after this. So, it was Halloween. My mom was working the night shift at my dad's bar. My sister was home with a teenage babysitter. My dad had taken me and my friend trick-or-treating already. This was the first year I was able to go out at night, so I was super stoked. When we got home, there were cops at my house. The babysitter was crying, and Mom came home. Earlier, while the sitter was alone with my sister, she had gotten a call from an unknown woman asking to speak to little Super Unknown 315. She said I was not there, and the woman stated that she had a gift for me and would call back. The woman did call back a few times, not joking, saying something similar a few times, and she began to insist that she was going to come deliver her gift. Eventually, she called and said to look in the mailbox. This is when the sitter called the police. The police found a pirate skull Halloween decoration that would talk and shake when you clapped, as well as several candy bars of various sorts. My whole family was really bugged out about this. I was scared, but I also kind of liked the skull thing, and convinced my parents after much protest to let me keep it. After a few weeks after that, my parents, of course, were on edge and hated the toy, as I guess it reminded them of that woman. They tried to work with the police, but there wasn't much they could do, and the whole thing went cold. Fast forward to the following summer, 1992. My best friend and I decided to have a car wash in front of his house, which was diagonally across the street from my own. We had our buckets, soap, hose, and a sign. You get the picture. This black car rolled up. It was an old 80s Crown Vic or something. It looked like that, at least. One of those big old town cars that steered like a boat. Get a sail? Anyway, it rolled down the window, and there was a woman sitting in the driver's seat. She had short, white hair, kind of had this whole Ursula vibe going. I told my parents she was old because of the hair, but looking back, she could have been as young as in her 40s. She said, "Hi, Super Unknown 315. Do you know who I am?" Of course, I said no. She went, "I'm the one who gave you those nice presents on Halloween." My jaw dropped, and I froze up, just staring at her. Then, like something out of a movie, she began to laugh maniacally and just sped off. I ran home and told my parents. That was the end of it, and they never figured out who she was. My father had speculated that this person must have believed she was wealthy and maybe was trying to get a ransom. Maybe she was a scorned ex-lover. I don't know. I've speculated many times and supposed many things over the years, but will likely never know at this point, as I'm now 35, and that seems like it was a lifetime ago. Sorry if this has an underwhelming payoff at the end. It has bugged me for years, and I guess I just wanted to share. In the past year, I have had several of my dad's old friends find and reach out to me on Facebook. My dad and I have the same name and face, so I was easy to find. 2 of them were women. One of them made me a little uncomfortable because she kept pushing to hang out, and she's a lot older than me, like go to the bar hangout. I said no, of course, but she asked a lot of personal questions. That's what brought this story back to the forefront of my mind. I'm getting a weird feeling in my gut that this woman, or even the other one that found me on Facebook, is the same woman that stalked me as a child. That thought gives me a chill, but I would really like to know who this person was and why they stalked me. Apparently, I was a desirable child. By Dance Joe Dance 18. A recent post by someone else about attempted kidnapping kinda jogged my memory again, so I figured I'd share my experience. Well, 2 experiences. The first part I really have no solid recollection of because I was so young, but it's been a story my mom has shared with family and friends over the years, so I've heard about it many times. This would have been the very early 90s, so I was probably 2 or 3. Definitely before cognitive memory, am I right? I don't really remember this specific trip, of course, but I do remember our routine of going grocery shopping, because my mom would always stop at Wendy's and get me chicken nuggets to eat in the cart. I will also mention that my mom worked nights at this same grocery store, the now defunct Pathmark chain. Anyways, as my mom was going about her business shopping, and I was going about my business tearing up some sweet nuggies, she was approached by an older woman. As I mentioned, my mom also worked here, and while she had countless regulars that would routinely come into the store, she never had seen this woman before. Now, I don't know if this woman was all there, but if she had evil intentions or not, she was just plain lonely, and when she stopped us, it was to ask my mom if she would sell me to her. By her account, my mom said that the woman was being dead serious, offering her $10,000 for me. First of all, I don't need to tell you that that's a terrible damn deal. I'm worth way more than that. Funny thing, come to think of it, am I worth any amount? Secondly, it was creepy as fuck and she was weird as shit. Obviously, my mom turned her down, told her off, and quickly got us the hell away from her. She rushed to the manager's office too to report what happened. Remember, early 90s, no cell phones. But by the time the security and the management went to find her, she was gone. I don't recall from the retelling of the story if the police were involved. I'll have to ask my mom to see if she still remembers, and I don't believe my mom ever saw her in the store again. So luckily, I wasn't tossed up on a register conveyor belt and scanned for $10,000. Unless she did sell me, and it turns out my mom isn't a real mom. Plot twist. My second experience was in the mid-90s. This one I do have some recollection of. My mom took me and my older brother to the mall because my brother was still a huge sports fan, and they were having a sports card show. If you are unfamiliar, a card show consists of a ton of vendors setting up tables throughout the mall, and they sell cards, autographs, jerseys, etc., anything sports related. Because of this, the mall was a lot more crowded than usual, and having the tables all set up sort of narrowed the general walking area. So lots of people were moving around through a tight space. This is an important detail. I also remember that it was around Halloween, because I vividly remember walking with my mom and brother past a Halloween adventure store. My brother had stopped and was looking at some Halloween cards and then later some sports cards. However, I was too distracted by the damn Halloween store because they had all the really awesome masks on this big wall that was visible from the outside of the store. Mistake number 1. I hadn't noticed it by this point, but my mom and brother had walked a little further down, not far, but maybe 15 feet away from where we initially had stopped near the Halloween adventure. I guess I was still in my mask-gazing trance in the midst of this crowded and condensed walkway, when suddenly I felt a hand holding mine. Again, I was not really paying attention, at least to anything but the masks. Mistake number 2. So this hand was pulling me, rather briskly too, in the direction we had come from, which struck me as odd. Why we were going back the way we came when there was stuff that we hadn't seen yet perplexed me. This was the question I intended to ask my mom, finally, when raising my eyes to look at her. Yeah, not my mom. Instead, when I looked up, it turned out to be another woman that I'd never seen before. The creepy thing was that she never even looked once down at me. She was holding me by the hand, pulling me away from my mom at a fairly quick pace, and her gaze was just dead set in front of her, like this bizarre look of determination. This was what terrified me most and made me realize I had to break loose. Even more unsettling, as I was wiggling my hand free, her expression still didn't change. She still never looked down at me. And once I got my hand free, she did not react. She never spoke a single word. She didn't try to get me again either. She just kept walking at the same brisk pace as if nothing had changed. Everything about her was so robotic. I ran back to my mom and brother. Again, this wasn't that far away, and it all happened in a matter of seconds. But it doesn't take a few seconds to get scared shitless. I vaguely remember grabbing my mom and crying. At the time, I just said I was freaked out because I thought I had lost them. For whatever reason, though, I was afraid of getting in trouble, so I didn't bring up what happened until later. By that time, what can I really do? It's funny, though. You read all of these L&M stories, and it sort of has you recalling different unsettling events throughout your life, and maybe you remember things you had long forgotten. You read about stalking and harassment that goes on for years, and it makes you wonder if these experiences are random, or if, for whatever reason, they were all calculated. It's thoughts like this that force me to re-examine both of these events, and brought me to one terrifying question. What if it was the same woman? Another haunted house creep by Spooky Coffee. For the past 2 years, I have been working at a haunted house attraction. It's a really fun gig, but the job tends to attract some rather creepy individuals. For the first 2 years that I have worked there, there has always been some kind of creep that works there. This post in particular will recount my second year's creepy incident. I'll start the story with orientation day. This is where we meet all the other fellow actors and choose our respective roles. When I walked into the building, my heart fell to the pit of my stomach. A man who looked like the same creeper from the first year at the haunted house was waiting for orientation to start, but I knew it couldn't possibly be the same man, because the man from my first year had killed himself months ago. And to make matters even stranger, this man had the same name, Daniel. So first, I thought this was all a wild coincidence. There was no way this man would also turn out to be a creep. Boy, was I wrong. Allow me to describe Daniel. He was a man probably in his late 40s or early 50s. He was a short and pudgy man. From the beginning, everyone could kind of tell that he was a little socially awkward. There was nothing wrong with that, but he really did kind of creep out most of the workers. Additionally, he couldn't drive, so he was either super early to work or super late, and he was usually the last to leave. So overall, he was a peculiar fellow. But hey, we're all working at a peculiar job. Orientation came and went without any issues, apart from my own fright, and that Halloween the attraction started. To understand the story, let me explain where I was located in the attraction. I was located in a large maze outside of the main house with about 5 other guys, including Daniel. These 5 guys were scattered throughout the maze, and I was at the center of it in a large rectangular room. This room was enclosed, unlike the rest of the maze, and had 2 exits. All of the guys beside Daniel were around my age, which was 18. I don't even know whose brilliant idea it was to put a lone girl in a large maze with 5 guys. Thankfully, I was somewhat friends with one of the guys, so I didn't feel too alone. However, this friend was located at the tail end of the maze. Daniel was located decently close to my room, but that didn't bother me at first. There was no reason for Daniel or any other guy to enter my room. They all had their positions to handle. One other thing to understand about this maze is that all of the actors were still able to see one another because the walls of the maze were relatively short. So, despite being away from my friend, I was still able to see him. Now, I hope that explained things clearly. Nothing strange occurred the first 2 nights, but on the 3rd night, Daniel made his move. When no customers were going through the attraction, the actors would just walk around the maze or sit on the ground to relax. During these times, I would leave my room and either sit on the ground somewhere or enter the main house to grab a water bottle. In order to entertain the main house, I would have to go through the maze and pass Daniel's area. The first few times that I did this, Daniel said nothing and would just watch me. But on the 3rd day, he finally mustered up enough courage to say, "Hey, how are you?" Not thinking anything to it, I happily replied and carried on to fetch a water bottle. From then on, any time I passed him, he always had the same comment. It was harmless at first. Things like, "You're really good. The weather's out. It's nice. You're a pretty scary actor." So, other than that, he always had something to say. I really didn't think too much of it. Days continued on, and Daniel kept getting a little braver. In between breaks, he would awkwardly walk toward the center of the maze. He moved quite slowly, like he was trying to be stealthy. My only saving grace was that before he could reach the room, a group of customers would begin to approach, and he would have to run back to his position. This was when alarm bells began to ring. I knew there was no reason for Daniel to leave his position and come to mine. Now, whenever I saw that he was motioning toward my room, I would go out in the other direction in the hopes to put more distance between us. It didn't help that he was dressed in a scary costume and wearing a mask. These things only added to the tension. On the times when I chose to sit on the ground and wait for customers, Daniel would go through the maze and stand where a single wall separated us. Looking back, I should have just walked away, but I didn't want to come off as rude punk-ass teenager. This is when he introduced himself, even though we'd already been on that an orientation day. Trying to play nice, I introduced myself, and we shook hands. Then he said the words I will never forget. "You're beautiful." This caught me so off guard that all I could say was, I'm sorry." He then repeated himself and kept his gaze locked on me. I thanked him awkwardly and refused to make eye contact with him. Keep in mind, I'm an 18-year-old girl, and he was a man in his 40s or 50s. I'm also covered in sweat, mud, and fake blood. Thoroughly creeped out, I was now determined to avoid him at all costs. Whenever we had breaks, I now went through the maze in the opposite direction of Daniel in order to get to the main house. It was a longer route, but it was worth it. Daniel soon noticed this and now put more of an effort in his walking toward my room between breaks. There were several times when he actually entered the room, but thankfully I had the wits to leave the room entirely and go stand where my friend was. Daniel would just stand in my room, look around, and one time he even sat down on the floor. It was actually comical sometimes to see him standing in the room, realizing customers were coming, then to rush out there and back into his position. Sadly, with how dark the maze was, I couldn't always get a sharp eye on Daniel's whereabouts. There was one incident where he approached me unexpectedly and said, "I like the way you scream." One of my lines that I said in the attraction to customers was, "You can't leave me, I need you." And Daniel just absolutely ate that up and loved it. Well, you can bet that after he said he liked that line, I stopped using it. I had to endure a month of this, but over time, Daniel got the message that I was not interested. In retaliation, he began to steal my scare points. There were certain areas, scare points near my room, that I would pop out of and scare customers. These scare points, so-called, were accessible only to the other actors, but no one else used them but me. I suppose Daniel was mad that I wasn't giving him any attention, so he decided to diss me and steal my scare point as revenge. He also began to copy some of my lines. Thankfully, toward the end of the haunt season in October, the managers of the attraction moved me inside into the main house. I'm not sure why, because I didn't say anything to them about Daniel, even though I knew I should have. So for the final days working there leading up to Halloween, I was nowhere near Daniel. When the season ended, I was relieved. However, the managers had the bright idea to open up a Christmas-themed haunted house, and they asked me to work out. I loved the job and didn't plan on having a creep ruin it for me. Although the many actors from the Halloween season didn't return for the Christmas attraction, Daniel was not one of them. He was there, and boy was he thrilled to see that I returned as well. This time, however, I convinced my best friend to work there as well. So with my best friend being there, she sort of acted as a deterrent for Daniel. Throughout the whole season, he never approached me. Well, that was until the final night. My friend and I were chilling in one of the rooms and waiting on customers. This room was the first room in the attraction, so everyone else was passing in order to get to their positions. Daniel began to pass through, then suddenly turned back around to face my friend and me. Again, with those beady, never-blinking eyes, he said, "I think you two are beautiful." I just cringed and looked away as my friend shyly replied, "Thank you." So, overall, Daniel is pretty creepy, but I suspect that maybe he doesn't know what he is doing is wrong. I don't think he realizes that flirting with young girls and trying to be in a room alone with them is okay. How many dumb men are like that, am I right? I caught word that he might be autistic, but I don't know for sure. But the feeling of dread I had in that maze is a feeling I will never forget. In retrospect, I really should have told someone. I kept telling myself that if Daniel did one more thing or tried to enter my room again, that I would tell the managers. One thing that I can think of at least lightens the mood, though, is that his costume was literally Tree Man. His mask was just a tree with a contorted, scary face. When customers would walk by, they would all shout, "Look, it's Groot!" It got a good laugh out of me every time. If I explained the story poorly, I'm sorry, and please ask anything if you're confused. So, Daniel, maybe you're just looking for love, but you're looking in the wrong places, man. I'm assuming I will see you again this coming Halloween season, and if I do, just please stay away from me.
Pretty sure I was almost lured into a sinister Halloween trap by Player 8.
This just happened a few hours ago. I have called and reported it to the police, and I am home safely, but guess I am still in shock. Could do with putting it down in writing, I suppose, to process it, and figured this is as good a place as any to share what happened. I finished work early today, so I decided to go out for a run. I set out around 4:30 and decided my usual routes, which cross many roads, would not be very practical, so I took an alternate route along with a canal towpath and some pathways through the woods that I knew would be less busy. Everything was going well. I was pushing myself steadily until I got to a pathway on the way back around 6 km into the route. It is a long, straight path with a canal on the left side, and on the right there is a wasteland where some factories used to be but have mostly been demolished. It has been left abandoned for as long as I can remember, and is overgrown with trees and weeds, but there are odds and bits of old factory that for some reason weren't fully demolished. As I got level with one part of the factory, which still has some old metal fire escape steps attached to it, I noticed a rough-looking guy sat on the wall with his legs hanging down. He jumped to his feet as he saw me coming and shouted something, but I couldn't make it out. As I came level to where he was, I heard him say, "Wait, can you help me find my phone?" He said this while he was running down the steps, and so I stopped as I got level with where the bottom of the steps were meeting, where we were standing just a few feet apart, but with a fence in between us. It was a really old iron fence too, with vertical metal bars that have spikes at the top like you sometimes see around churches and things. He asked me if I would help him find his phone again, saying he had dropped it somewhere nearby, and asked if I could ring his number so he could listen to it. I felt I couldn't exactly refuse, as my phone was strapped to my arm, so I said if he could tell me the number, I could take my phone off my arm and unlock it. He blurted out a phone number, but I said it was far too fast, and I didn't begin with 07, which made me start feeling like something wasn't right. Although I was beginning to suspect at this point, I wasn't really worried. I was in pretty good shape, had a big size and weight advantage over him, plus there was a fence between us. He didn't seem really in very good physical shape either, and seemed like he might be homeless. I figured if he was trying to mug for my phone, his only chance would be if he pulled a knife on me, so I made sure to stay a good distance away from the fence and kept my eyes on where his hands were. I didn't tell him I didn't catch any of the numbers because he said it too quickly, and he came out with another number. This time it also had an 07 at the beginning. I entered 7 random numbers, and then he started looking around and saying, "I can hear it. Come help me look," as he looked at the ground. I was about to say that I didn't even finish dialing the second time when a much larger man appeared from behind a section of wall to my right. He was also really scruffy looking from the look of his eyes. It seemed like he was on drugs too. He came out saying that he could hear the phone ringing toward him and beckoned me to come to the gap in the fence and help look. The first guy said, "It's ringing, yeah?" And I told him it was, even though I still hadn't dialed the full number, and now I was sure they were trying to lure me to come over the side of that fence. After 2 or 3 times of them beckoning to me come help, always insisting they could hear the ring, I heard the second guy say, "He's not going to fall for it. he said in a hushed way, as if he thought I wouldn't hear with it being out in the middle of nowhere, but of course I could clearly understand what he said. The first guy started acting quite aggressive and punched a tree, telling me he needed the phone badly, how his whole life was on that phone, telling me, rather demanding that I come help them look for it. While he was punching the tree and ranting, the second guy had taken a few steps away, meaning I couldn't keep my eyes on both of them at the same time. This, of course, was after 1700 in the afternoon, and by this point it had gotten really dark all of a sudden, which made the whole thing even more unsettling. I noticed there was a gap in the fence too, where some of the bars had been removed right where the second guy was standing, and I decided at this point to get the hell out of there and make a run for it. Neither of them said anything as I ran away, which makes me sure that they had malicious intentions. If they genuinely lost their phone and needed help, I would have expected them to shout, "Where are you going?" or something like that, to try and get me to come back. But they didn't shout a thing. After sprinting for a good 20 or 30 seconds, I turned to see if they were chasing me. Instead, they were both standing on the same side of the path where the gap in the fence had been, but were not chasing me. They were just standing there, watching me run away. I continued running, but kept looking back every few seconds until I was certain I was out of sight. It was at this point I got off the canal path and onto the roads. The person I spoke to on the phone to report it to took my details and my descriptions, but I think it wasn't worth worrying about. After that, though, I was glad I had called so they would investigate it. This whole Halloween incident has left me a bit unnerved. I mean, the coincidence of it all. And I'm pretty sure I won't be jogging that route alone anytime soon. Halloween and Bloody Knives by No Honey Medved. This happened over a decade ago. It was Halloween of 2008. I was in college and still in a relationship with my first serious boyfriend. We'd been together since high school, and it took this night to show me our relationship was bad, abusive. It took more than one incident too before I finally left him for good. He was wonderful when he was sober, but intense and controlling if he was drunk, and I learned he was truly terrifying during those times. This was the first such incident that truly scared me. He joined in a stupid game, a Gatorade and Shine challenge. They emptied a bottle of Gatorade at least halfway, filled the rest up with moonshine. The goal was to finish the bottle within an hour and then tell them crazy stories. Well, he completed the challenge, but he never did tell his friends the story. He couldn't remember most of it, and it painted him in a horrific light. I knew things were heading downhill when he started calling me a slut, and after saying hi to a guy friend at a party we were at. I decided we'd better head home before he got any worse. I thought I could nip it in the bud, manage it. We got home and changed out of our costumes. James wanted to have sex, but in the state he was in and after what he'd called me, I wasn't really interested. I left the apartment after that to go smoke. Our neighbors were having a party, and two guys were outside smoking too. They came over to see if I was okay. I'd been crying, and I guess they'd heard us yelling. I said I was, which they could obviously see was a lie. They let me know if I needed help, they'd help me. James chose that moment to come outside, said he'd heard us talking and had to get me away from them, and he stalked towards us. I stood up to get between them and him. They told me they meant what they'd said and not to forget it. Then they told him to watch himself. I was facing them to say goodbye and thank them for the offer when one of the guys gasped, staring at my boyfriend in shock. I turned around and my eyes immediately caught the ground. Just as what I was seeing registered, the other guy lunged forward and grabbed me, pulled me behind him. What was on the ground that had elicited such reactions, you ask? Blood. Blood was dripping on the ground from his hand. He was holding a knife so tightly that he'd sliced his hand open. I begged my boyfriend to drop it, but he only agreed to when I walked back toward him. I was an idiot, I know. The guys seemed at a loss, and I felt so bad for them having their Halloween ruined by this scary, crazy bullshit. They left me to it after I swore I'd be fine, reiterating that I'd come to them for help if I needed it. We'd got inside, and I immediately started hiding all the sharp objects. I called James's roommates, begging them to come home. He started screaming then to give him the knives back, how I was a slut, and if I wouldn't even screw him, what use was I? I called my parents after that and left. Then called his mom because I was scared he'd hurt himself. She let me know, though, how he was my problem now. I should have called the police, but I didn't want to ruin his life. I know. I'm ashamed to say I got back together with him for 6 more months of hell after that. But today, I can safely say, James, we are not together anymore. He can't bother me, and we certainly won't ever meet again. For sure, that was the last Halloween I'd be called a whore again.
Kid with a knife tackles me on Halloween by Spooky Myuu.
This story took place in 2008. My family was invited by one of my brother's friends to go trick-or-treating in their neighborhood. At the time, I was 13 years old. I'm male, and I have a very tall build. The night went as normal for the most part, until I got to this one house. After leaving the house, I was suddenly tackled to the ground by a kid about my age who put a knife to my neck. My first reaction was to kick him off me. Back then, I was known for my ability to send people flying a few feet when pinned down. He flew off. Next thing I knew, I saw more kids of his age around me, all of them with pocket knives as well. I knew I could take on one kid, but the 6 or 7 I was no match for, and I bolted as fast I could, and the group gave chase. I probably ran for about 10 to 15 minutes before I found a place to hide. I jumped, and about 20 seconds later, I saw the group run right past me. That was my cue to return to my brother's friend's house. Nothing serious happened after that. Though we were leaving the area, that night, my mom pointed out a few cop cars with some kids getting inside. One of them looked like a kid who tackled me. When I saw my brother's friend next, he mentioned that no one was hurt by them, and they were just playing a prank. But it was enough for someone's parents to call the police.